So the first thing that I sometimes say to survivors is, do you want things to change? And that is kind of the basic question, isn't it? Like, do you want things to change, or are you comfortably miserable? Because there is a sort of statistic that says, it's not a statistic, it's a scenario of the devil that you know, right? We know, this is what I know. This is terrible. I feel awful. This is what I know. But if you feel awful and you feel terrible, do you want things to change? If you're able to recognize that things are wrong, then that means at one point in your life, things were much better. Okay? Do you want things to get back to that point, or do you want to stay the way that they are? And if you want things to get to a point where you felt safe in your own home, where you felt confident in yourself and your abilities, then let's talk. So it's one of the reasons I really wanted to come into what I consider this almost a preventative measure before social services or law enforcement really get involved, is trying to get involved beforehand and go out to the court system and go out and meet individuals in group therapy or at our community mental health agencies and say, hey, are you experiencing domestic violence? What can we do to help? Before we meet you in the ER. Well, we'll meet you in the ER too, but I'd like to shoot for before. I was the director of the drug court here in Perry County, and of course during COVID, things sort of tumbled. I have a history of working with families in danger. My background is in social services and interviewing children experiencing child abuse. So I spent about 6 months at drug court and just kind of decided, I really wanted to go into preventative work. I think what people picture in their head is the Lifetime movie, right? And I appreciate Lifetime movies. Sure, everyone's guilty pleasure, right? But I think that's what everyone pictures, is the just extreme control, and it happens very quickly, very suddenly, and those red flags are very noticeable. That's not what happens. I say domestic violence, and I use that term a lot because that's the name of my program. Violence doesn't necessarily have to happen for it to have that serious imbalance of power and control. 1 in 3 women now, I think it used to be 1 in 4. The statistic has changed this last year to 1 in 3. Women have reported that they've experienced domestic violence in some form. Again, it doesn't have to be violence. It can be control, it can be loss of control, it can be threats of violence in and of itself. That's the biggest statistic to me. There are 3 of us in this room, which means 1 of us has experienced some type of domestic violence in our lives. Even if it's just having a conversation like you and I are having now with somebody who is experiencing domestic violence and saying, hey, do you know what? Here's what you need to do. Let's safety plan right now. If they start using, or if you feel like you're not safe and violence rises, what can we do to get you and your kids safe? To prevent what we saw, what we've seen over and over again, which is domestic violence leads to homicide. We lost 3 police officers and a K-9 unit last year in Floyd County as they were serving a domestic violence protection order. So that perpetrator had held her captive. She was able to get away. When the officers went to serve an emergency protective order saying stay away from her, he killed 3 of them in their K-9 unit. We had another one happen in Perry County 2 years ago, I believe, at the height of the pandemic. An individual shot and killed his wife and one of his children, an infant. We had another in Letcher County last week. A gentleman shot and killed his wife who was pregnant. This happens, and it happens in our community. And there is no shame in coming forward and saying, hey, this is happening to me. One of the things I have to say to everyone is there's no such thing as a person with one problem. Substance dependency is another big contributing factor. Sometimes. There doesn't have to be substance use or dependency for there to be domestic violence. But we see that a lot in a lot of cases that we have here. Our survivors of domestic violence have kind of turned to alcohol or to other drugs to kind of cope with what they're dealing with. Because if you're feeling trapped and isolated, if you feel like the person you love dearly doesn't love you at all, or that love is conditional based on how you protect, how you take care of them and serve their needs, then you need some mental health something to help you cope. And so, yes, we turn to alcohol or drugs to kind of cope. There's a lot of shame in that, but there doesn't need to be. So the LKLP Domestic Violence Shelter has been around for a long time. The shelter itself is exactly what you kind of imagine of individuals who are experiencing domestic violence within their homes. So it's mothers or women and women with children. They can come to the shelter to get away from that situation. We also have the extended program, which if you are in the middle of a domestic violence situation, or if you are experiencing that and you need help to get out, or you can get out but you don't want to come into the shelter, most people don't, but you need to go to court and you don't know that process, or you need to figure out how to file for a divorce, or to maybe even file criminal charges against your partner, things like that. We help with that. So the answer, I guess, is a little bit of everything that involves domestic violence or family violence. Call our crisis line and it will send here to the shelter. Now, the shelter is staffed 24/7, which means we are here 24/7, so my staff can answer that phone at any time. They can answer your questions, be it 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning. Just depends on what's safest for you. We don't have all of the answers, but we have some, and we're going to try to help you out as best we can over the phone.